Candace Owens, once seen as a fearless truth-teller and a close ally of Charlie Kirk, has dropped a claim so shocking that it sent the conservative world into absolute chaos. After Charlie Kirk's death, a dark and unexpected narrative emerged. And when Candace hinted that Charlie Kirk's wife may have been entangled in ways no one saw coming, fans were left stunned. The real question isn't whether the claim is true or false. The real question is why Candace Owens is saying this at all. Is this grief speaking? Or is it a buried truth finally coming to the surface? And most disturbing of all, if these are only words, why are they being spoken with such confidence? This story has everything: loyalty, power, politics, and a silence so loud it shook an entire movement. Stay till the end, because what unfolds next, no one was prepared for. The moment Candace Owens spoke, the internet froze. Not because she raised her voice, not because she attacked an enemy from the opposite side, but because she turned her words towards someone who was once considered untouchable in her world. For years, Candace and Charlie Kirk stood shoulder to shoulder, symbols of a new conservative generation, touring campuses, dominating headlines, and presenting a united front. To their supporters, they weren't just allies, they were family. That's why what happened next felt like betrayal to some, truth-telling to others, and pure chaos to everyone watching. After Charlie Kirk's sudden and tragic death, grief rippled through his followers. Vigils, tributes, and emotional messages flooded social media. Candace Owens was among those who mourned publicly, sharing memories and expressing disbelief. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Loss often brings reflection, and reflection brings emotion. But slowly, her tone began to change. What started as sorrow shifted into suspicion. Questions replaced prayers. And then, almost without warning, Candace began hinting that there was more to the story, much more. She spoke about feeling uneasy. About things that never sat right with her. About conversations from the past that suddenly felt different in hindsight. Her audience leaned in, sensing something heavy was coming. When she referenced Charlie's inner circle, people assumed she meant political operatives or organizational leadership. No one expected the direction she was about to take. Then came the moment that stunned everyone. Candace implied that Charlie Kirk's wife, a woman the public largely saw only as a grieving widow and mother, may have been entangled in ways that raised serious questions. She didn't present evidence. She didn't make a direct accusation. Instead, she used suggestion, tone, and carefully chosen words. But the damage was immediate. Within minutes, clips spread across platforms. Headlines exploded. Fans argued fiercely in comment sections, trying to interpret what Candace really meant. Some believed she was exposing a hidden truth she had carried for years. Others accused her of crossing an unforgivable line, dragging a private individual into public suspicion at the most painful moment imaginable. And many were simply confused. Why now? Why say this after Charlie was gone? Why hint instead of speaking plainly? Candace defended herself by claiming she was being misrepresented. She insisted she never directly accused anyone of wrongdoing. According to her, she was only asking questions, only sharing feelings, only pointing out inconsistencies. But in the world of media, implication can be more powerful than accusation. Once an idea is planted, it grows on its own, and this one grew fast. As the backlash intensified, Candace doubled down emotionally, if not explicitly. She spoke about betrayal, about loyalty, about how people change when power and image are at stake. She suggested that Charlie had been isolated toward the end of his life, surrounded by people who didn't truly have his best interests at heart. Again, no names were spoken clearly, but everyone knew who was being discussed. What made the situation even more unsettling was Candace's insistence that her connection to Charlie went deeper than the public ever knew. She described late-night conversations, personal struggles he allegedly shared with her, and moments that, in her words, proved she understood him in ways others didn't. To some viewers, this came across as genuine pain. To others, it felt uncomfortably possessive, as if she were claiming a unique ownership over his legacy. Critics began to question her motives. Was this about truth, or attention? Was she processing grief, or weaponizing it? And most controversially of all, was there jealousy involved? Candace dismissed those ideas as insulting and misogynistic, but the speculation only grew stronger the more she spoke. Meanwhile, Charlie Kirk's wife remained mostly silent. That silence became its own kind of statement. Supporters urged her to speak out, to defend herself, to shut the rumors down. Others argued she owed the public nothing, especially not explanations for veiled claims built on speculation. When she finally did respond, her words were brief and controlled. She denied any wrongdoing, condemned conspiracy theories, and asked people to stop spreading harmful narratives. No drama. No counterattacks. Just a plea for decency. That response shifted the tone for many observers. Suddenly, the contrast was clear, one side speaking emotionally and cryptically, the other grounded and restrained. Even within conservative circles, voices began to turn against Candace. Former allies distanced themselves. Commentators, who once praised her bravery, now questioned her judgment. Some openly stated that whatever point she was trying to make had been lost the moment she dragged a widow into the spotlight without proof. But Candace refused to retreat. She framed herself as the only one brave enough to say what others were afraid to whisper. She portrayed the backlash as confirmation that she was over the target. According to her, powerful people wanted her silent, and that alone meant she must be right. This mindset resonated deeply with a segment of her audience, people already distrustful of institutions and narratives. To them, Candace wasn't the villain, she was the warning signal. Still, the cost was undeniable. The story had stopped being about truth and started being about damage. Damage to reputations. Damage to friendships. Damage to a legacy that, until now, had been largely unified in memory. Charlie Kirk was no longer just remembered as a political figure, he had become the center of a bitter public fracture. And beneath all of it lay the most uncomfortable question of all. Even if Candace believes what she's saying, does belief justify implication without evidence? In a media world driven by emotion and engagement, where lines between personal pain and public responsibility blur, that question matters more than ever. Because once words like entangled are spoken, they can never be taken back. And in this story, the consequences were only just beginning. As the fallout grew, the story stopped being about a single statement, and started turning into a full-scale war of narratives. Candace Owens was no longer just reacting to grief. She was now actively fighting for control of the story surrounding Charlie Kirk's life, death, and legacy. Every new clip, every post, every podcast episode felt less like mourning and more like a challenge to everyone who disagreed with her version of events. What disturbed many observers was how Candace framed herself in the center of Charlie's story. She spoke as if she had been uniquely chosen to understand him, repeatedly suggesting that others around him either failed him or benefited from his silence. She hinted that certain truths could not be spoken openly, that saying too much would put her at risk, and that the audience should read between the lines. That language alone was enough to fuel endless speculation. When people are told a secret exists, but aren't given the details, imagination does the rest. Online, theories multiplied. Some fans began dissecting Candace's words frame by frame, searching for hidden meanings. Others pulled old photos, clips, and timelines, trying to prove connections that were never meant to be scrutinized. Charlie Kirk's marriage, once treated as a private and respected part of, critics began drawing a hard line. They argued that Candace was blurring the line between intuition and accusation, between emotion and fact. They pointed out that repeating insinuations without proof doesn't make them safer, it makes them more dangerous. Some accused her of exploiting tragedy for relevance, especially at a time when her influence had been waning. Others went further, claiming that her fixation on Charlie's personal relationships crossed into obsession. That word, obsession, stuck. Clips resurfaced where Candace spoke about Charlie with an intensity that, in hindsight, made people uncomfortable. Statements about being the only one who truly knew him, about being there before his marriage, about understanding his struggles better than anyone else. To supporters, this showed closeness and loyalty. To critics, it looked like resentment wrapped in righteousness. Meanwhile, Charlie Kirk's wife became the unintended target of relentless online harassment. Strangers questioned her character, her intentions, even her grief. She was accused of things no evidence supported, simply because someone influential had hinted at entanglement. The human cost of that speculation was immense. Friends and family of the Kirk household reportedly urged the public to remember that there were children involved, children who would one day see these accusations and wonder why no one protected their mother. That reality forced many neutral observers to choose a side. For a growing number of people, Candace crossed an irreversible line. It didn't matter whether she believed what she was saying. It didn't matter whether she felt betrayed or excluded. Publicly implying wrongdoing without proof, especially against someone who had not chosen a public life, was seen as morally indefensible. Even those who once admired her boldness began saying the same thing. This wasn't courage, it was cruelty. Candace responded by framing herself as a victim of censorship and gaslighting. She claimed powerful people were coordinating against her, trying to discredit her, because she threatened their narrative. Every criticism became, in her telling, further evidence that she was right. This circular logic made it nearly impossible for her critics to reach her. Any attempt to hold her accountable was simply proof of conspiracy. The situation reached a breaking point when major conservative figures publicly distanced themselves. Some unfollowed her. Others released statements emphasizing that Candace spoke only for herself. The unity that once defined their movement fractured in real time. What had started as a personal conflict was now a visible ideological split, with Candace standing alone on one side, daring anyone to challenge her. Yet despite the isolation, her core audience remained fiercely loyal. They saw her as the only one brave enough to question uncomfortable truths. To them, the emotional intensity, the vagueness, the refusal to back down, all of it signaled authenticity. In an age where trust in institutions is low, certainty often matters more than evidence. Still, the unanswered questions lingered. If Candace knew something real, why not present it clearly? Why rely on implication instead of proof? And if she didn't know anything concrete, why keep speaking at all? Those questions hung in the air as the story continued to spiral. What was once a private tragedy had become a public spectacle. Grief had turned into suspicion. Loyalty into accusation. And at the center of it all stood Candace Owens, convinced she was telling the truth, even as the damage around her continued to grow. By the end of this phase, one thing was clear: this was no longer about what happened to Charlie Kirk. It was about how power, influence, and unchecked emotion can rewrite reality in front of millions of people, and how once that process begins, stopping it may be impossible. By the time the controversy reached its peak, the damage was already done. What began as grief had transformed into a cautionary tale about influence, boundaries, and the irreversible power of words. Candace Owens stood at the center of a storm she insisted she didn't create, yet one she continued to fuel. And while the internet moved relentlessly forward, the people caught in the middle were left to live with the consequences. As weeks passed, the tone around Candace subtly shifted. The outrage didn't disappear, but it evolved. Instead of shock, there was fatigue. Instead of curiosity, there was concern. Even some of her most loyal supporters began asking quieter, harder questions. Not publicly, but privately. Questions about responsibility. About timing. About whether there are moments when silence is not weakness, but restraint. Candace, however, showed no sign of regret. She continued to frame herself as someone burdened with knowledge, someone forced into the role of messenger. She spoke about truth as if it were a weight only she was strong enough to carry. In her mind, history would vindicate her. That belief became the foundation of everything she said next. Yet outside her circle, a different narrative was solidifying. More commentators began pointing out a pattern, not just in this situation, but across Candace's career. Moments where provocation replaced precision. Where implication generated more attention than evidence ever could. Where controversy kept her name in headlines long after the substance of the argument faded. To these critics, the Charlie Kirk situation wasn't an exception, it was the most extreme example yet. What made this case different, though, was the human cost. Charlie Kirk's wife had not asked for public attention. She had not built a platform. She had not engaged in online battles. And yet she found herself forced into a spotlight she never chose, defending her integrity against shadows and suggestions. Her restraint, her refusal to engage in mudslinging, earned quiet respect from people across ideological lines. In a world addicted to reaction, her calm became a form of resistance. Over time, public sympathy shifted decisively. Where Candace once commanded the emotional center of the story, she now appeared increasingly isolated. Invitations slowed. Collaborations dried up. Media figures became cautious. Not because she lacked influence, but because association now came with risk. The controversy had made one thing clear: Candace Owens was unpredictable, even to her allies. Still, she pressed on, convinced that retreat would mean admitting fault. But the internet has a way of moving on, even from the loudest storms. Gradually, the clips stopped circulating. The comment sections quieted. New controversies replaced old ones. And yet, beneath that calm surface, the legacy of this moment remained. Charlie Kirk's name would forever carry a shadow it never had before, not because of facts, but because of suggestion. Because once a question is asked publicly, even without evidence, it can never be fully erased. For his family, that shadow is permanent. For his supporters, it's an uncomfortable footnote. And for Candace, it may be the turning point that defines how history remembers her. In the end, no proof emerged. No revelation confirmed the insinuations. No hidden truth came to light. What remained instead was a lesson, one as old as power itself. That influence without restraint can become destruction. That conviction without accountability can become cruelty. And that being loud does not make one right. Candace Owens believed she was speaking truth to power. Many others believe she confused emotion for insight and suspicion for reality. Somewhere between those two perspectives lies the uncomfortable truth: intent does not erase impact. This story was never just about what was said, it was about what was implied, and who paid the price for it. And perhaps the most haunting part of all is this: long after the headlines fade, long after the arguments stop, the people hurt by this moment will still be living with it. While platforms rise and fall, grief remains. Reputation lingers. And words, once released, never truly disappear. That is the real ending of this story. Ktar, if you're still here, it means this story made you think. So before you scroll away, ask yourself one question: Where should the line be drawn between truth, opinion, and responsibility? If you believe conversations like this matter,